This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Mod Pod, your ACM special. That's Adoption and Change Management. And we are joined by a team today. The ACM team headed up by Michael DeDominick, Managing Consultants. We have Nick Boza and Steven Mensah, who are ACM consultants. So let's kick this one off. Right, let's kick this off then. ACM, Adoption and Change Management. It's a great acronym. It's been bounced around the industry a long time. Mr. DeDominick, as the man in charge, what is ACM?
Yeah, ACM is, as you described, adoption and change management. And in so many ways, so many projects, we do a lot of technical work, obviously, at Modality, but the principles can apply to all kinds of changes in an organization. And the context that it comes up for us most frequently is we have technical consultants and we have people who know how to do all kinds of amazing coding and programming and all these sorts of things and manage the technical side of what's going on. So we can get our ducks in a row in that and flip switches and port people over and do all these things in a timely manner and in a proficient way. But what so many organizations tend to lack is any sort of focus on the people side of that change. There's always going to be a reason that initiates that change, and there's always going to be some state changes as they're going through that. So there's where they are now, there's that awkward time in the middle of the transition state, and then of course there's going to be where we are eventually, the future state. And so on a technical aspect, those are pretty smooth. We've got a pretty good grip on those, but the people side of that change is really what we focus on in adoption and change management. And so Pete may have mentioned this earlier, but Modality is a ProSci certified change management SOP, and ProSci is Microsoft's preferred methodology for managing the people side of all this stuff. So organizations are just constantly changing. Even Microsoft's offerings are constantly changing. What Teams looked like 2 years ago is a lot different than what Teams looks like today, and there's all kinds of additional beneficial security pieces to bring into bear. And oftentimes that change will just flop. People won't start actually using the new tool, and there has to be some leadership behind that. There has to be effective communication and training, and people have to be equipped to be successful in what's going on. And so that focus on people can really make the difference. And what we really like about what we do is it's backed up by data. Like, we have tools at Modality based on making decisions from data, and ProSci does the same thing. So everything in the methodology is based on like 20 plus years of research, and we're big fans of that. So we want to support people through those technology changes with effective support around that. And oftentimes that comes down to a good balance, right? In business, we've gotten pretty used to having some really active and engaged project management. And then we can look at budgets, we can look at resources, we can look at getting the right people in the right place at the right time. And we're pretty good at that. That's been pretty integrated into our projects. Oftentimes we're starting to get better at engaging leaders and sponsors who can kind of build coalitions and build support for a specific change. And then that's really where the change manager starts to come in and work with those leaders and work with those communications teams and training teams to put all those people side pieces together. So when we're talking about adoption and change management, we're really focusing on the people side of all this. What does it look like? We can be great about getting the ball rolling and maybe turning on the telephones and Teams instead of chunks of plastic on desks for the last 50 years, but actually showing people how to use that stuff and smoothing out that change so they're not dipping into a lack of productivity or frustration is really the goal here. So it's not just about teaching someone how to do something, but it's teaching them why and when to do the right thing and increasing productivity, not just negating a drop, but ultimately getting them to a place where they were better off than before. And sorry, that's my little spiel there, guys. But with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what this looks like.
I think that was a great episode. Thanks ever so much for joining, guys. No, I mean, I think the sort of the synopsis you've given there is absolutely bang on the mark. I mean, one of the things that I think I shared with you guys a little while ago was just a little clip. It's much easier to get a product or a service adopted when people understand why they're doing it and why the change is there and how it's going to make things better. And if you look at, for people maybe who aren't so familiar with the whole ProSci piece, ProSci comes down to one of the tools within it is often referred to as ADCAR from the initials, but it's actually only one component. But that's the component dealing with personal change, isn't it? It's the awareness is the first A. So what's coming? Why is it coming? The D is for the desire piece, which is actually getting somebody to want to use something, because if they want to use it, they're going to use it. If they don't want to use it, they're going to be resistant, right? You've got the K, which is the knowledge, the actual training part. The A is then ability and actually getting them to use the thing in anger. And then you've got the piece you talked about with the reinforcement part, which is change doesn't happen just because you say, right, we're going to do this, and you do it once and that's it. Everybody changes. People are going to change at different paces. So I think you've got that sort of rounded process. We focus very heavily in on that, the change to the individual piece. And so with that sort of generic layout that we've got, probably a loaded question. Of course, it's loaded. That's what starts a conversation, right? Do organizations believe that they are doing ACM, or do they not want to do ACM, or do they just want to train, or are they fooling themselves that they are doing it? What do you reckon?
I think personally in the initial piece, they're not thinking about it. They're when a change comes in, it's usually money orientated. Save a business money, we'll make this change, and then everything's going to be hunky-dory. We don't really need to do much, just training and all that kind of stuff. And then they realize that money they've spent, they might have lost that big piece of productivity with the people that are working and so on. So then then they start to think about the whole ACM piece. Oh, did we get the communication right? Did we get the right people that were going to sponsor this particular project in at the right place and so on? So yeah, I think at the beginning, probably not, depending on who they are and so on. Some businesses do have, a change management team. We've met some great businesses that have, and they hardly need us. They just ask us for a piece of advice and so on. But, for the majority of part.
And is that because the projects are technical and being kicked off from the technical teams?
I think for probably the examples I'm thinking about, definitely from a technical standpoint, if it's going to save them money, they just need to flick some switches and so on, then then we'll just get someone in to train some people, and then that's it. That's all they need, and that's how it's going to work. But definitely in terms of other organizations and other bits of changes, they probably don't see that piece where they have to find out why and what the desire is, what people need, and what people can get from those changes. So for the most part, we're definitely a needed function.
Definitely. I think I'd add to that as well, Steve. I think they're all really good points. I'd add that there's sometimes, I think anyway, and I've experienced this directly working as an internal technology adoption lead, there's an assumption from others in the organization that training is just the single answer to driving adoption. That adoption is just about training. And that's even evident sometimes by how organizations set themselves up. So I've worked internally as a technology change and adoption lead. I was actually sat in learning and development within HR. And I think that's quite telling about how others in the organization viewed adoption and change management and what it is, essentially just a bit of technology training, technology related training. So I think that's quite telling. It kind of, I think, shows you a little bit about maybe some of the assumptions that others make about what ACM is. And I think it is underpinned by, well, it's just training, isn't it, in a lot of cases. If you think about it, if you think about our go live support we provide at Modality, the hypercare element of support that we provide, we may actually spend more hours on that than we do training when you look at the length of a project. So that kind of goes to show, that sort of flies in the face of this assumption that it's just about training.
Yeah, and I think there is an element of, you know, I mean, when Skype first came out, sorry, actually no, let's go back a bit. Let's go back to the sort of the LCS type OCS.
I was going to say, how
days.
far back are you going?
Well, I can go a lot further than that, mate. I can little chat execution stuff on the to pick someone out by their machine name. That was really rubbish. But you know, if you look back at it, when those really first came out into the industry, it was a proper big shift. But now, almost everybody who has some sort of tablet, laptop, mobile device, whatever it is used to the communication style. And so actually you could probably, you know, take somebody off the street and say, look, here's Teams, and they'll be able to work out how to, you know, to do some of the messaging and all that sort of stuff. I think there is a natural sort of level where people think, oh, well, they could use it, or they could use Skype, therefore they know how to do this. Problem is, you know, in the same way that telephony was a small part of the Skype for Business landscape of what it could do, the communication part of Teams is a small part of what it can do on the whole sort of collaboration thing. So I think, you know, if somebody's coming from Skype, can they learn Teams? Well, yeah, they probably can pretty easily. You're just showing them a few extra bits and pieces. And we've certainly done it for other clients where we've turned around and said, do you know what, this is just a step up to add the telephony piece in. So you don't need an awful lot. You just need, you know, some refresh, or, you know, the awareness of the new bits and pieces. But I think when you look at the bigger picture, you know, and the collaboration and how you share documents and all that sort of stuff. I had an Excel spreadsheet open the other day with 9 people making changes at the same time, and you think this is really quite cool, actually.
Yeah.
You know, it's taking that bigger picture, and that's the real big shift that I think people miss. They think, yes, we'll do some training, but it is not actually really that much about the training. The training is the easy bit in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at our corporate deck on what ACM is, I don't know if it still has it, but it used to divide, you know, the full ProSci piece, and then called out training as option number 2, and then ACM as option number 3. So it was a very clear demarcation that training was not adoption and change management. So it's like, you know, customers, provide me with some materials, some flyers, and a bit of a, you know, instructor-led training. Right, that's not change management, mate. Sorry, you're fooling yourself. So, I mean, Steve, you sort of called out the organisations where it's sort of coming probably more from the technical side. Of the ones that have change managers, do we see that being a far stronger story, or are they not sure because of the it's almost the reverse of the problem if you've got true change management?
I mean, of the ones that we've seen, you know, it's more a case of getting that reassurance of what they're doing is going to work, or what it, you know, is it the right thing to do, and just the direction in which they need to go. Because again, you know, we talk about ProSci, they're ProSci accredited as well, so they know about a current and so on, so they know about the process, but it's just getting that reassurance from us, as we are, you know, expert leaders and so on in ACM and all that. So we're just giving them that reassurance, so they know what's going on. And to be honest, you know, what they're doing is pretty cool. It is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think back, I know that there's been several larger organizations that we've interfaced with, and we'll do these discovery workshops and stuff like that at the beginning, and we absolutely love to have someone from communications in that conversation. We absolutely love to have actual trainers from that organization as part of that conversation. And if by the grace of anything holy, there's someone there whose job title involves change management, that is like the piece de resistance, and the success of that project is going to be a higher likelihood. The thing that the questions that those folks tend to ask are more of the, what are the risks associated with this type of project? What do we need to be looking out for? We've done this with literally thousands and thousands of users. They've never done it before, right? So there might be some familiarity with the principles of ProSci and walking users through AdCar and some of those pieces. But, you know, as far as, hey, how do I nail like the scope of the messaging? Like, does this need to be like a 30,000 foot view, or are we literally just saying, hey, here's how to use Teams on your telephone, or hey, this is an opportunity to reshape the perception of this tool and what it can do for your users? I mean, ultimately, it comes down to a conversation about like productivity. If you're really scoping it out, how does this make your life easier? What can you do before that you couldn't? What's in it for me? And I think that space is harder for people that don't have that familiarity with the work that we specifically do, even if they have a strong background in ACM. Like those little stories, those little customer experiences that describe how much easier it is to send a message or check your voicemail or, you know, change your status or actually get meaningful work done for mobile. They don't necessarily know those types of things. They don't know those what's in it for me statements for specific personas at all. And so that's a lot of where those conversations tend to go.
Yeah. And do you think you have obviously change managers who potentially haven't dealt with Microsoft 365 or whatever it is before? You have technical teams who aren't necessarily familiar with you know, the whole sort of change management piece, and are looking at it, like we said, from, you know, delivering a project perspective. Do you think there's a disconnect potentially sometimes between those two teams, and that's where we have the experience of it because we do both sides? We understand the products and we understand the process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, without question, that's the gap. Hey, how many people should we try and have this change happen to at one time? You know, what scale is appropriate for managing? Should we just flip the switch for 10,000 people at once, or should we do it for 1,000 people at a time? You know, what's the weight of that going to be on our current systems, and what kind of structure do we have in place to help those people through that change? And those are the questions that neither of those parties tend to know the answer to. But we do.
Yeah, and I think
not to pump us up too much, but we do.
But I think you know, a lot of it, when you were rolling out technology products in the past, there were quite often a lot of things that, you know, technically, oh, hang on, this doesn't seem to be working, that doesn't seem to. With Teams and actually, I guess generically much more cloud services, they're up, they're available, they're on. You've transformed into the how do I's, not this isn't working or I can't log in. It's much more how do I do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, that's a factor. Some of the other things that pop up are literally just down to the value of you know, what kind of time and intention went into vetting this list of users. It could be something that simple. And, oh, we forgot to assign a number to that person. Oh, that person doesn't have the right license just yet. Oh, that person just started 2 weeks ago. So those are the little types of things that can bubble up that might be perceived from a more technical perspective. But I mean, overall, Pete, yeah, it's more of a, where is this? How do I access this? When and how do I do this? Which dial pad should I use if I need to enter in an extension? Those types of things that come down from actual use.
Okay, so another question based off the back of that then. If you're putting in a technology, let's pick a figure, you're spending 100,000 on something, whether it's dollars, pounds, I guess is kind of irrelevant. You've got your users who potentially are faced with a whole bunch of new technology. Yes, you can give them training. We all know how successful just training is. It's, you know, quite often just ignored, left, people don't turn up, or they switch off and start doing emails or whatever it is in the background. how do you justify the cost of the project and the cost of that interrupt to productivity by not doing a proper ACM job? Because I think that's one of the conversations that comes up quite a lot in the early stages of pre-sales is, oh, no, we'll do some training later. Well, hang on a second. And I know you've been involved in it, Mike. And I think it's not an uncommon conversation, right?
In that case, I think as an organization, you're in danger of just kicking the can down the road, aren't you? Essentially, because if you go and say switch something on, upgrade something, whatever the case may be, and just assume that all will be well with no actual plan and strategy in place as to how it should be used by the various different business units and all the rest of it, all the way down to team and individual user level. If you take Teams as an example, if you just release Teams into the wild without any ACM sort of support or wrap around, you're very likely to run into all sorts of issues later on down the line regards governance, for example, things like duplicate teams, permissions and access, who's keeping on top of that stuff. And essentially at some point you'll have a mess to disentangle, which will later on cost you
money,
and probably cost you more. It's better to actually plan for the rollout and include ACM in the first instance, rather than kind of kid yourselves that it's not required. It's just kicking the can down the road, I think, in a lot of cases.
Well, we've seen it in a lot of cases where duplicate teams have appeared, and that can either be through typos or just blatant duplicate, names, and then people end up working in two different channels or teams, whatever it is, and all of a sudden somebody's got to go and recreate that. But you've also lost productivity because someone's like, yeah, no, I've put it in the files tab on the client ABC team. No, you haven't. Yeah, no, I have. You're just working in two totally different places, right? So there are definitely, I think, costs associated to that side. But I think there's also a very valid question about, you're spending 100 grand on the tech. How much are you prepared to invest in your user?
Yeah.
And
that's time and effort and just trying to make their lives better. So, I mean, when you think about it, some people, when they think about work and what they do, if there's a big change and they, if they don't like it and it's making their life a misery, they might want to leave. That then you lose that expertise as well. So, you want to make sure that you've got enough support for those users to, make them feel like, yes, they're getting this great big upgrade. They're getting the tools that they need to do their job, but it's going to make their lives much better down the line once they have this support, communications, they know what's going on, and they're happy to use it.
And resistance is actually a real big challenge, isn't it? I mean, if you've got somebody who just doesn't want to use it, understands why, but doesn't want to, you've got a challenge on your hand, right? And I mean, if you're into replacing staff because somebody's just like, nah, don't want to sit. I think as long as somebody can see the benefit for why they're doing it, it comes back to what we said at the beginning. If you understand the why, etc. But I know that we've had conversations with organisations in the past where we've turned around and said, okay, you're putting in this project, let's do an intensive 3-month ACM program on it. It's going to come out, and your overall per user cost is going to come out at, I don't know, £7. £7.
Yeah.
Really? You're not prepared to spend a tenner on your team to actually make sure that this thing sings?
Just don't buy him the T-shirt that no one's going to wear, and we can do some awesome ACM.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, when you get onto the scale, and especially with the tooling we have in the background allows us to scale this stuff way beyond what most organizations can do. When you start to scale that out, the cost per user comes down to ridiculously low levels. And so it does make you wonder, what is the value on the retention of your staff?
What are your people worth to you?
Yeah, exactly.
But that cuts
Technology's
to the heart.
great when everybody else has disappeared and done one.
Yeah.
And I guess it's pretty hard to work out how much it might cost if a project doesn't go well and you don't have ACM in place. That's pretty hard to work out what that cost is, but we know that it's going to cost much more than what it would if we was in place. So
I mean, Mike
we can go look up GDPR fees and fines.
Yeah,
we can look at those costs.
Yeah.
Was it 20 million or 4%, isn't it? I think something like that.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's a lot.
Whichever's higher. Yeah.
I think another way you can look at it as an organization, as well as your at the org level, of course, you want to increase productivity, you want to achieve potentially cost efficiencies and reductions, avoid that resistance and business disruption. You want to maintain employee engagement, as Steve said. But you can also look at it as an investment in your people. Lots of companies say we invest in our people, but here's your chance to prove it. You can look at it as skills development for your people at the same time, both in terms of literally acquiring new technological skills, which obviously are as important as ever to every business and to every individual who wants to forge a good career, but also in terms of helping your people adopt a change mindset, which just means that future changes become easier based on the positive experience that employees had of that change, much less likely to resist the next one. There will be a next one, but there's always change, right? So I think you can look at it as also kind of equipping your people to handle technology and change better, which can only be a benefit to you as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we talked about actually only the other day when we were lining up this. I think for me there is a definite transition coming, in the sense that ACM is now much more akin to productivity than it is just about educating somebody.
Yeah, definitely.
It's how you think about all the conversations you could have about how you make someone's life more efficient. That Excel spreadsheet that we were talking about the other day with 8 people amending it, that I would have had to have pulled in 8 copies of emails and pasted all the answers across. It's like, and I know it's a really noddy example, but it is a brilliant example because it is exactly that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch where this goes, but there is a definite question about how you get that value built in at the beginning of the project. And I don't think we always have the answer to that, because the person who's delivering the project wants to potentially keep the costs down as best as they can. But then you've almost got that conversation saying, well, I get that, but what is the cost implication if people don't use it? And Mike and I have had this where clients have come back to us and said, yeah, we've done all our rollout and it's absolutely brilliant, and then they've come back 2 months later and saying, we're on a real sort of downward trend here. Nobody's really using the collaboration stuff, and we don't know why.
Yeah,
it's because basically you shoved a tool out there, told them to use it, and haven't really sort of showed them how good it can be for their jobs or for their daily routines. You've fallen into the trap of basically rolling it out and not making sure that change means anything to people. I mean, there was a customer a while ago who was admittedly forced into a very major change very quickly. So it was a big cutover on one weekend. And they came back to us and said, we've had this for 2 years and nobody's really using it. And then you went through and had some discovery sessions and talked to the staff, and they were like, well, yeah, we just don't know what to use it for.
Yeah.
And so you take that right the way back and go, okay, let's talk about how you work. Who do you talk to? What sort of things do you need to do? And then we actually, for this particular one, we had a promo video created, which showed them a day in their life and how it went from conception right the way through. And then we went back and said, look, watch this video. And they all came back and said, yeah, it's a great video. Right, now we're going to show you how to do it. And so all of a sudden, the pennies started to drop and people, I get it. It's like, right, there you go. And I think sometimes you have to do that. You've got to make it relevant to people's life.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of comes back to the it kind of comes back to the D again in ADKAR, the desire piece and the what's in it for me statements. I think the D for desire is often a weak point in the organizational change efforts, because if you imagine a project and a project manager, and he or she's got his communications plan in place, probably does a good enough job of giving people awareness that a change is coming, and maybe just assumes that that's all that's required. Well, we've communicated to people, right? We've told them what's coming and what's happening, so job done. But of course, you kind of then you kind of underestimate what it takes to really motivate someone to break what is a habit, because that's what you're asking them to do. Change the way they work, change the way they use something. We're creatures of habit, so that building that desire is what gets people passionate enough to be motivated enough to consciously make the decision to change. And obviously ultimately that's what you're trying to do. So yeah, absolutely, Pete, anything you can do that talks to people right down to their personal kind of individual level of what they're interested in and what they need to achieve, that's what's going to get you going.
Yeah, and I remember I think Mike, and I won't expect you to remember this, but I'm sure that we had a conversation when a certain global phenomenon triggered in about a year and a half ago. I'm not saying the word. And ADKAR almost really got replaced with NCAR, which was just necessity, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. And it did, because it's like, there's no way, there's no desire, you're having this, that's how we're going to work from home. Bang, go. And I do think a lot of people have got to grips with it, and actually the damage limitation has been quite good, but there's still an awful lot of people out there who don't fully understand how it can help, because it really was just sort of shoved out there as a go home, communicate.
Well, and the distinction there, I think, Pete, and it's an apt observation, of course, but the distinction I see is, all right, we've got this thing, we had to flip it on out of necessity. All right, how do we do what we need to do, right? And let's just map A to B. Let's look at what we're doing now and how we can do it using this tool, rather than what does this tool enable us to do, right? And I think that's a lot more compelling conversation. And I think for organizations, as long as that leads to an increase in, security, and increase in productivity, all these sorts of things that a lot of times users aren't going to think of. Just something as simple as co-authoring, like you described earlier, Pete, is a brand new experience for a lot of folks. They haven't been in a document with multiple people editing it yet that's saved in the cloud automatically, that they can go back and look at the old versions of it or approve changes to a specific document. That's still kind of new to a lot of user bases, and we haven't necessarily adapted how we co-author a document together in a specific organization, how we do version control in a specific organization. So those types of things are business processes that can change based on modern tools. And I think out of necessity, because of the thing that you mentioned, a lot of tools were made available for people, but not necessarily the, hey, here's what we can do with this now, or let's explore what we can do with this now. Because guess what? You can actually do a whole lot more. You can become more asynchronous. You can become more mobile. You can become more just flexible with how meetings and conversations happen. And that's a really awesome, exciting conversation to have that really can be a fruitful one. But getting to that spot where you're not in that reactive mode, where you can be a little bit more proactive, that's kind of the trick.
Yeah. I think there's also an element as well with, we focus quite heavily on the reinforcement piece because I think it's really important. But one of the things that ties into it for me is so many projects get signed off at the point that the technology is delivered.
Yeah.
And really, the sign-off point for me should really be when you have hit, I don't know, 85% engagement at a sustained level. That, I think, is when you know that it's successful, not, yeah, you've rolled it out and now nobody's using it. Brilliant. Yeah, but it went in.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
No one's using it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a total mismatch on defining something as successful.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think from previous experience working in doing this kind of stuff for one organization, something I definitely recognize. It was like we're on this never-ending treadmill of change, working across multiple projects at any given time.
Well, that sounds quite depressing, doesn't it? The never-ending treadmill of change.
It's
Wow.
like a doomsday scenario.
Sorry, mate.
Fine. Change is fun, folks. Honestly, it really is. It is, so long as you've got me, Mike, and Steve helping you out. It's absolutely fine. You'll have loads of fun. But then once that change is implemented, as you say, Pete, the project's closed without any sort of thought about what happens afterwards. Like, there's no understanding of how to ensure the adoption is maintained or even driven further, because usually there are phases of adoption, like we were just talking about with teams. You might be now comfortable with the communication aspects of it, but you might not have even thought about how you can collaborate more meaningfully and the extensibility options that you've got now at your fingertips. And so you'd have kind of change and adoption management. Adoption and change management activities are kind of sometimes viewed as a point in time activity that are bound by the project time frame.
Yeah.
When we know it doesn't just die at the point the project is closed. There's still actually arguably just as much work ahead of you at that point to really drive it on.
Michael, we're going to test your ProSci knowledge here. How many times do you have to tell someone on average before it sinks in?
Oh yeah, I mean that's standard to try and sneak in there in a variety of ways, in a variety of channels.
He's avoiding the answer, isn't he?
No, I know the answer. No,
giving it the build up.
It sounds like a lot until you think about how many ways people can hear it. So the standard is like 7 times. You got to hear something 7 times before it actually sinks in. Whether that's you read it on the inside of a bathroom stall, you saw a poster in the office, someone changed your corporate background about the change that's on your computer that's coming up, or you read it in an email, whatever those channels are, 7 minimum is kind of the goal there.
Exactly. And it's not once, and it's the very reason that, you know, we've now crafted the ACM as a service piece, because the never-ending treadmill of change you know, is actually something that's quite real. You know, Microsoft haven't created M365 and now they're just going to leave it to sit and fester. It's always changing. I mean, look, Viva's out now, right? The way that you're going to learn is changing. The shared topic cards that come up, that's something else that's going to need to be introduced into the marketplace. And you're like, well, actually, yeah, this is just another thing. And once they've got to grips with that one, guess what? They're going to find something else to bring into the mix. So I do think, you know, we need people to get their head into the space where this is an ongoing process. Even if you take one change, exactly to your point, Nick, it doesn't stop at the end of the project when everybody's had their technical rollout. It stops probably a good 3 months after for a typical project, when you know, and you've got statistical data, which is where we started, to say, yeah, people are adopting it. And the ones that aren't adopting it, well, there's what was it in the ProSci thing? There's about 10 different ways of dealing with resistance. I think including firing people, but that's quite extreme.
Maybe hold that one back.
Yeah, that's definitely a second resort reserve. No, but it's a definite last resort, isn't it? But I think we do have to try and work on, as an industry, this is not something that stops when the technology project gets signed off.
So is it more a case of more, you know, business owners understanding that better, because they're the ones that are making the decisions when it comes to, you know, putting these projects forward?
Yeah, completely. I don't think that's a technology question at all. I think whoever wants to transform their business, because that's what we're talking about, whoever is putting their neck out to say this is a good idea, that's the person who needs to understand that this doesn't stop once you've got all the pieces of software rolled out. What is to stop on a Teams telephony? If somebody doesn't like it, just pick up their mobile, just carry on using that, right? That's not a cultural change. That's another piece of software I've got that I don't want to use.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100%. It's got to be the business.
And by the way, in the vast majority of instances, they're leaving somewhat significant functionality on the table. There's stuff organizations are paying for that they're not leveraging.
Yeah.
And discovering why and where that can be leveraged is huge. I mean, they're paying for it, right? Like, let's get the most from it.
Comes back to data again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You bought X amount of licenses and you can do all this funky stuff. What are you doing? You're not doing any of this. Great. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, I think we're just about at time, guys. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Not so much with Michael because I was talking to him last week, but sorry, love you really. But thank you very much. I think it's taken an interesting route, actually, that one. So that was episode 17. Yes, it was 17, wasn't it? The ACM special. Hopefully everybody is now familiar what adoption and change management is and should be, and when to finish it, what success is, where the point of success comes. But thank you very much to Steve and Nick and Michael from our adoption and change management specialists. And yes, we will be back in a couple of weeks' time.
Cheers all.
Thanks.
This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.